Hello again and welcome back to Techni-Lux. Today we're going to talk about the pivot console a little bit more in depth. Today specifically is module 1 of training for this console. Today's module is going to be the pivot console, addressing, patching, basically setting up your console for use. So let's get right into it. So the Pivot Q512 is a really great little console for working with moving lights, LED fixtures, color mixing, stuff like that. But like any decent lighting console, you're going to need to do a little bit of setup. And what we're going to talk about today is adding the extra wing, plugging into DMX, and then what it takes to actually set up and address our fixtures to use them in the console. So let's take a look at setting up the wing and the DMX. Like any lighting console, the first thing we need to do at this point is get it patched into the lights we're going to use, but we're also going to connect our wing. So I've taken my console and I've already connected the wing and physically attached it. To hook it up to the console, I simply take the included cable, plug it into the Pivot 512 port there and expansion one here. And now I've got my wing connected. Connecting a light is just as simple. I've already got my lights here, and what I'm going to do is I can either patch into the DMX out on the wing, but in this case we're going to go into the DMX out on the console itself. Now something really important back here is going to be the updates, and I'll show you where we may need that in just a second. But at this point, I've got my wing connected, I've got my DMX out connected, my power is already connected, I'm ready to start programming. So let's turn our console back around and power it up, the little button on the back. Now that our console's on, we're actually going to patch in the lights. Now, this is already assuming you have some lights in your system and in your rig that you're working with. You're going to need to know a little bit about those lights. You're going to need to know their channel count and their name, and we're going to have to find out if we've got the library for those inside the console already. So that's one of the next things we're going to take a look at. What I do want to do is get rid of this USB light so it's a little bit easier for you to see the screen, and let's take a look at what I'm going to do to actually patch the lights. So my console's on now, and the show I had loaded in here before is already loaded up. So what we're going to do is actually go into our setup. We push and hold menu. You have to push and hold it. If you tap it, it goes through some other preset locks for the pan tilt on the knob down below, but we don't want to do that yet. What we want to do at this point is go into setup, and the first thing I'm going to do is clear my previous show. Are you sure you want to clear it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Clear show completed, so now I have a clean slate. We're going to go into address patch, and I'm going to go into the fixture browser. Now at this point, this is where you're going to need to know what fixtures it is that you have in your show, and either you need to know the addresses they have in them now, or I find it easier to patch them all into the console, and then I'll go in and address my fixtures later. If you're not really sure what we're talking about with addressing, we'll have to do another module here you're going to look at that is about DMX and the general rules of DMX. That isn't part of this. That is another module we have available. But as for this, I'm going to go looking. Now, my first fixture I know about is going to be a generic fixture. So I'm going to page down, and sure enough, I've got generic fixture, and it's an RGB 3 channel. It's just a regular light that has a red, a green, and a blue chip running on 3 channels of data. That's all I need. So it's an RGB 3 channel fixture. I want to add 1 light. Fixture ID can be 1. DMX universe is 1. Now I've actually got 2 universes available here. I've got one coming out of the console, and I've got an extra one coming out of the wing. Once you purchase a wing, you get an extra universe. This console can actually have up to 3 universes, either with 2 additional wings or with a wing and a wireless. There's a bunch of different options, and we talk about that in the sales promo, but in this case, we know that we've got 2. We're going to run it both out of universe 1, which is one that comes out of the console, and in this case, the first light is going to be addressed 1. So let's go ahead and add that fixture. It says it's reading the file, and it just put in an RGB 3 channel on address 1. I go back in the fixture browser, and at this point I need to go back to my folders, and I'm still on the internal disk. Now, if I needed to bring in from the outside, if I needed to bring in some additional folders, you get a really neat USB key that comes with the console. It's in a bag with it. You can change it to USB disk once you plug it in here. In this case, though, I know I've got it on the internal disk. Now, another question that I get is, what happens if my light is not in here? What if I go through and I look all the different brands and I don't see it in there? If I go down and let's look at Techni-Lux, and I'm looking at Techni-Lux, I look through it all and I say, wow, I don't see the light I need in here. Well, you have two options. The first one is, you remember I showed you the neat little scan that was on the back of the board earlier. What is our QR code? You go to there with any smartphone and you'll go to the Techni-Lux website and it will show you the most recent fixture library, and you can look and see if we've got it on that library. If it still isn't there, you can always call us at Techni-Lux and we'll help you make one. Or also on that same USB disk that you got from us, there's a neat fixture editor that works on any Windows computer, and you can go in and build your own fixtures and import them into here. That's a whole separate thing, but if you need it, that is available to you. In the meantime, I know that my other light I've got is a Vector LED 160. We'll call it a Vector LED 160S. We're adding one. Fixture ID is 2. DMX Universe is still Universe 1 because it's plugged in where my other light is, but the DMX address now is 4. The first light took up 3 channels, red, green, blue. This one's going to start on number 4. So we go ahead and we add that. Reading the files, and now when it comes out from here, I've got my RGB3 channel on Universe 1, address 1. I've got my Vector LED 160 on Universe 1, address 4. So now I'm going to run out to my rig and I'm going to put those addresses in the light. I'm going to address up the first one as address 1, address up the Vector LED 160 as address 4, and at that point, I should be ready to go. So I'm going to go back out to the main control screen, then I'm going to go back out to the main editor, and now I have an RGB3 channel, a Vector LED, and at this point I'm going to go out and power up my rig and we'll take a look at them. Okay, so my console's set up and patched, and I've got my entire huge lighting rig ready to go. At this point, I'm going to go in and just check and make sure I've got control of everybody. So here's the first light I started to work with, and if I go into him and start to control his individual functions, I can see that I can turn the red off, I can turn the green off. I only have blue left, so let's turn the blue off. And then I can check individual colors. There's the green, there's the red. And we'll talk about how I'm doing all of this when we get into the programming module. This is just setup right now. We're sort of testing things. So at this point, I'm also going to test my moving light. Oh, there he is. I've got control over him to move. That's great. So now I know that both my lights are on here. I've got control of both of them. What I want to do now is finish setting up my console the way I want to see it. So let's take another look at the console. Now, as part of setup, we may want to go in and customize some of our controls here. For example, I can take this fixture and let's go ahead and give it another name. RGB3 channel really doesn't tell me a lot about that fixture, so I'm going to push and hold menu again. One of the options is rename. There it is, RGB3 channel. Let's go ahead and delete that, and let's call it my LED panel. There we go. So now all of a sudden it's become an LED panel. And the other thing I can do is push and hold this, and let's change the button color. Oh, let's see, I want to make that one red. All right, now my LED panel has a red button and a custom name on it. So as I can do this, I'll go through and rename all of my fixtures and set them up exactly the way I want to call them. Let's take a look at a couple of the other setup options we have also. Once again, we push and hold menu and we go into setup. General options, couple of things we should know about here. Default delay time. Delay time is the time from once you push the button to execute a cue or a scene until it actually goes. For the most part, we want that to be a 0, which is good. Default fade-in time. The fade-in time is the time it takes for the cue to run or the sequence to run from the time you push the button until it's complete. 2 seconds is nice. It doesn't let it just snap on or happen right away. It gives it kind of a nice fade-in. And you can change that later, but this way it's already available to you. Playback mode is going to be HTP or LTP, meaning highest takes precedence or last takes precedence. Usually we use highest takes precedence for things like dimmers. Last takes precedence for things like moving lights. We'll leave this alone at HTP. Input mode raw. One of the things that I like to change to this is whether you want to see input mode raw or percentage. I'm used to things being a percentage. In other words, 0 to 100. Raw means 0 to 255. Since DMX is an 8-bit protocol, you can look at it that way. RGB CMY palette set. We have the choice of Roscoe, Lee, Gam, or Chris. You know what? I'm not going to pick any one favorite brand here, but let's just leave it where it was already defaulted to Roscoe. Unlock password, we'll leave that alone. That's if you lock your console. That's a little bit more of an advanced option we'll talk about in another module. Let's go ahead and hit OK to change that. The other thing I want to change in here is my controller configuration. You have 6 playback controllers on the main board. Each of those controllers can be different types of functions. They can be group masters, they can be playback masters. What I like to do is change my number 6 fader from a group master to the grandmaster and dead blackout. What that means is I now have a grandmaster controller for the entire console and a dead blackout button below it. So once I hit OK, I now have to use fader number 6 as my master fader. There's a bunch of other options inside of here. Some of them involve the fixtures specifically. Some of them are for like backup and restore. I can go ahead and save a backup onto the console for my show. I can also save it onto the USB disk. In this case, on the internal disk, I can hit backup, give it a name, we'll leave it ahead as backup, hit enter. And now this show that we've just made with those 2 lights are going to be saved on here as backup. So I can get back to it at any time. You can save as many backups as you want. You can also switch shows as you want. Besides that, we have some diagnostics. We have that lock we talked about earlier. We have the foot switch and wireless configurations and software upgrade. The same place you go to get the library updates on the back of the console, that QR code will be the software updates when there are firmware updates. And that's where you're going to go to set that. Touch calibration in case the screen is acting up a little bit. Wireless configuration for when you add the WDMX module in the back, but most importantly, editor. And that puts me right back where we started, and that pretty much covers what it takes to initially set your console up. So at this point, we've taken our fixtures, we plugged them into the console, we found them in the library, we patched them in, we set their address. It's a lot of setup, but now I've got my lights all ready to go. Everything in the console is ready to control them. So that's the basic setup and patching of the console. The next module we're going to do is going to be how to actually program the console. So come on back and take a look at that, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.